Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we step once more into the gentle green glow of an enchanted forest, a soft retelling inspired by the timeless magic of the Green Fairy Book. Welcome back, and thank you for continuing this journey. For within these pages rest old tales from many lands, woven with courage, wonder, mystery, and a quiet touch of spellcraft. If this peaceful path brings you comfort, feel free to like and subscribe and share where you're listening from. Now breathe and follow me deeper into this twilight realm of green-hued folklore, where every story offers a new enchantment for dreamers like you. The War of the Wolf and the Fox. There was once upon a time a man and his wife who had an old cat and an old dog. One day the man, whose name was Simon, said to his wife, whose name was Susan, "Why should we keep our old cat any longer? She never catches any mice nowadays, and is so useless that I have made up my mind to drown her." But his wife replied, "Don't do that, for I'm sure she could still catch mice." "Rubbish," said Simon. "The mice might dance on her, and she would never catch one. I've quite made up my mind that the next time I see her, I shall put her in the water." Susan was very unhappy when she heard this, and so was the cat, who had been listening to the conversation behind the stove. When Simon went off to his work, the poor cat meowed so pitifully and looked up so pathetically into Susan's face that the woman quickly opened the door and said, "Fly for your life, my poor little beast, and get well away from here before your master returns." The cat took her advice and ran as quickly as her poor old legs would carry her into the wood, and when Simon came home, his wife told him that the cat had vanished. "So much the better for her," said Simon. "And now we have got rid of her, we must consider what we are to do with the old dog. He is quite deaf and blind, and invariably barks when there is no need, and makes no sound when there is. I think the best thing I can do with him is to hang him." But soft-hearted Susan replied, "Please, don't do so. He's surely not so useless as all that." "Don't be foolish," said her husband. "The courtyard might be full of thieves and he'd never discover it. No, the first time I see him, it's all up with him, I can tell you." Susan was very unhappy at his words, and so was the dog, who was lying in the corner of the room and had heard everything. As soon as Simon had gone to his work, he stood up and howled so touchingly that Susan quickly opened the door and said, "Fly for your life, poor beast, before your master gets home." And the dog ran into the wood with his tail between his legs. When her husband returned, his wife told him that the dog had disappeared. "That's lucky for him," said Simon. But Susan sighed, for she had been very fond of the poor creature. Now it happened that the cat and dog met each other on their travels, and though they had not been the best of friends at home, they were quite glad to meet among strangers. They sat down under a holly tree, and both poured forth their woes. Presently, a fox passed by, and seeing the pair sitting together in a disconsolate fashion, he asked them why they sat there and what they were grumbling about. The cat replied, "I have caught many a mouse in my day, but now that I am old and past work, my master wants to drown me." And the dog said, "Many a night have I watched and guarded my master's house, and now that I am old and deaf, he wants to hang me." The fox answered, "That's the way of the world, but I'll help you to get back into your master's favor. Only you must first help me in my own troubles." They promised to do their best, and the fox continued, "The wolf has declared war against me, and is at this moment marching to meet me in company with the bear and the wild boar. And tomorrow there will be a fierce battle between us." "All right," said the dog and the cat. "We will stand by you, and if we are killed, it is at any rate better to die on the field of battle than to perish ignobly at home." And they shook paws and concluded the bargain. The fox sent word to the wolf to meet him at a certain place, and the three set forth to encounter him and his friends. The wolf, the bear, and the wild boar arrived on the spot first, and when they had waited some time for the fox, the dog, and the cat, the bear said, "I'll climb up into the oak tree and look if I can see them coming." The first time he looked round, he said, "I can see nothing." And the second time he looked round, he said, "I can still see nothing." But the third time he said, "I see a mighty army in the distance, and one of the warriors has the biggest lance you ever saw." This was the cat, who was marching along with her tail erect. And so they laughed and jeered, and it was so hot that the bear said, "The enemy won't be here at this rate for many hours to come, so I'll just curl myself up in the fork of the tree and have a little sleep." And the wolf lay down under the oak, and the wild boar buried himself in some straw, so that nothing was seen of him but one ear. And while they were lying there, the fox, the cat, and the dog arrived. When the cat saw the wild boar's ear, she pounced upon it, thinking it was a mouse in the straw. The wild boar got up in a dreadful fright, gave one loud grunt, and disappeared into the wood. But the cat was even more startled than the boar, and spitting with terror, she scrambled up into the fork of the tree, and as it happened, right into the bear's face. Now it was the bear's turn to be alarmed, and with a mighty growl, he jumped down from the oak and fell right on the top of the wolf and killed him as dead as a stone. On their way home from the war, the fox caught score of mice, and when they reached Simon's cottage, he put them all on the stove and said to the cat, "Now go and fetch one mouse after the other, and lay them down before your master." "All right," said the cat, and did exactly as the fox told her. When Susan saw this, she said to her husband, "Just look, here is our old cat back again, and see what a lot of mice she has caught." "Wonders will never cease," cried Simon. "I certainly never thought the old cat would ever catch another mouse." But Susan answered, "There, you see, I always said our cat was a most excellent creature, but you men always think you know best." In the meantime, the fox said to the dog, "Our friend Simon has just killed a pig. When it gets a little darker, you must go into the courtyard and bark with all your might." "All right," said the dog, and as soon as it grew dusk, he began to bark loudly. Susan, who heard him first, said to her husband, "Our dog must have come back, for I hear him barking lustily. Do go out and see what's the matter. Perhaps thieves may be stealing our sausages." But Simon answered, "The foolish brute is as deaf as a post, and is always barking at nothing." And he refused to get up. The next morning, Susan got up early to go to church at the neighboring town, and she thought she would take some sausages to her aunt who lived there. But when she went to her larder, she found all the sausages gone, and a great hole in the floor. She called out to her husband, "I was perfectly right. Thieves have been here last night, and they have not left a single sausage. Oh, if you had only got up when I asked you to." Then Simon scratched his head and said, "I can't understand it at all. I certainly never believed the old dog was so quick at hearing." But Susan replied, "I always told you our old dog was the best dog in the world, but as usual you thought you knew so much better. Men are the same all the world over, and the fox scored a point too, for he had carried away the sausages himself. The story of the fisherman and his wife. There was once a fisherman and his wife who lived together in a little hut close to the sea. And the fisherman used to go down every day to fish, and he would fish and fish. So he used to sit with his rod and gaze into the shining water. And he would gaze and gaze. Now, once the line was pulled deep under the water, and when he hauled it up, he hauled a large flounder with it. The flounder said to him, "Listen, fisherman, I pray you to let me go. I am not a real flounder. I am an enchanted prince. What good will it do you if you kill me? I shall not taste nice. Put me back into the water and let me swim away." "Well," said the man, "you need not make so much noise about it. I am sure I had much better let a flounder that can talk swim away." With these words he put him back again into the shining water, and the flounder sank to the bottom, leaving a long streak of blood behind. Then the fisherman got up and went home to his wife in the hut. "Husband," said his wife, "have you caught nothing today?" "No," said the man. "I caught a flounder who said he was an enchanted prince, so I let him swim away again." "Did you wish nothing from him?" said his wife. "No," said the man. "What should I have wished from him?" "Ah," said the woman, "it's dreadful to have to live all one's life in this hut that is so small and dirty. You ought to have wished for a cottage. Go now and call him. Say to him that we choose to have a cottage, and he will certainly give it you." "Alas," said the man, "why should I go down there again?" "Why," said his wife, "you caught him, and then let him go again, so he is sure to give you what you ask. Go down quickly." The man did not like going at all, but as his wife was not to be persuaded, he went down to the sea. When he came there, the sea was quite green and yellow, and was no longer shining. So he stood on the shore and said, "Once a prince, but changed you be into a flounder in the sea. Come, for my wife, Ilsabel, wishes what I dare not tell." Then the flounder came swimming up and said, "Well, what does she want?" "Alas," said the man, "my wife says I ought to have kept you and wished something from you. She does not want to live any longer in the hut. She would like a cottage." "Go home, then," said the flounder. "She has it." So the man went home, and there was his wife no longer in the hut, but in its place was a beautiful cottage, and his wife was sitting in front of the door on a bench. She took him by the hand and said to him, "Come inside and see if this is not much better." They went in, and inside the cottage was a tiny hall, and a beautiful sitting room, and a bedroom in which stood a bed, a kitchen, and a dining room, all furnished with the best of everything, and fitted up with every kind of tin and copper utensil. And outside was a little yard in which were chickens and ducks, and also a little garden with vegetables and fruit trees. "See," said the wife, "isn't this nice?" "Yes," answered her husband, "here we shall remain and live very happily." "We will think about that," said his wife. With these words they had their supper and went to bed. All went well for a week or a fortnight. Then the wife said, "Listen, husband, the cottage is much too small, and so is the yard and the garden. The flounder might just as well have sent us a larger house. I should like to live in a great stone castle. Go down to the flounder and tell him to send us a castle." "Ah, wife," said the fisherman, "the cottage is quite good enough. Why do we choose to live in a castle?" "Why?" said the wife. "You go down. The flounder can quite well do that." "No, wife," said the man. "The flounder gave us the cottage. I do not like to go to him again. he might take it amiss. "Go," said his wife. "He can certainly give it us, and ought to do so willingly. Go at once." The fisherman's heart was very heavy, and he did not like going. He said to himself, "It is not right." Still, he went down. When he came to the sea, the water was all violet and dark blue, and dull and thick, and no longer green and yellow, but it was still smooth. So he stood there and said, "Once a prince, but changed you be into a flounder in the sea. Come, for my wife, Ilsabel, wishes what I dare not tell." "What does she want now?" said the flounder. "Ah," said the fisherman, half ashamed. "She wants to live in a great stone castle. Go home. She is standing before the door," said the flounder. The fisherman went home and thought he would find no house. When he came near, there stood a great stone palace, and his wife was standing on the steps, about to enter. She took him by the hand and said, "Come inside." Then he went with her, and inside the castle was a large hall with a marble floor, and there were heaps of servants who threw open the great doors, and the walls were covered with beautiful tapestry. And in the apartments were gilded chairs and tables, and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and all the rooms were beautifully carpeted. The best of food and drink also was set before them when they wished to dine. And outside the house was a large courtyard, with horse and cow stables and a coach house, all fine buildings, and a splendid garden with most beautiful flowers and fruit. And in a park quite a league long were deer and roe and hares and everything one could wish for. "Now," said the wife, "isn't this beautiful?" "Yes, indeed," said the fisherman. "Now we will stay here and live in this beautiful castle and be very happy." "We will consider the matter," said his wife, and they went to bed. The next morning the wife woke up first at daybreak and looked out of the bed at the beautiful country stretched before her. Her husband was still sleeping, so she dug her elbows into his side and said, "Husband, get up and look out of the window. Could we not become the king of all this land? Go down to the flounder and tell him we choose to be king." "Ah, wife," replied her husband, "why should we be king? I don't want to be king." "Well," said his wife, "if you don't want to be king, I will be king. Go down to the flounder. I will be king." "Alas, wife," said the fisherman, "why do you want to be king? I can't ask him that." "And why not?" said his wife. "Go down at once. I must be king." So the fisherman went, though much vexed that his wife wanted to be king. "It is not right, it is not right," he thought. He did not wish to go, yet he went. When he came to the sea, the water was a dark gray color, and it was heaving against the shore. So he stood and said, "Once a prince, but changed you be into a flounder in the sea. Come, for my wife, Ilsabel, wishes what I dare not tell." "What does she want now?" asked the flounder. "Alas," said the fisherman, "she wants to be king." "Go home, she is that already," said the flounder. The fisherman went home, and when he came near the palace he saw that it had become much larger, and that it had great towers and splendid ornamental carving on it. A sentinel was standing before the gate, and there were numbers of soldiers with kettle drums and trumpets. And when he went into the palace, he found everything was of pure marble and gold, and the curtains of damask with tassels of gold. Then the doors of the hall flew open, and there stood the whole court round his wife, who was sitting on a high throne of gold and diamonds. She wore a great golden crown, and had a scepter of gold and precious stones in her hand, and by her on either side stood 6 pages in a row, each one a head taller than the other. Then he went before her and said, "Ah, wife, are you king now?" "Yes," said his wife, "now I am king." He stood looking at her, and when he had looked for some time, he said, "Let that be enough, wife, now that you are king. Now we have nothing more to wish for." "Nay, husband," said his wife restlessly, "my wishing powers are boundless. I cannot restrain them any longer. Go down to the flounder. King I am. Now I must be emperor." "Alas, wife," said the fisherman, "why do you want to be emperor?" "Husband," said she, "go to the flounder. I will be emperor." "Ah, wife," he said, "he cannot make you emperor. I don't like to ask him that. There is only one emperor in the kingdom. Indeed, and indeed he cannot make you emperor." "What?" said his wife. "I am king, and you are my husband. Will you go at once? Go. If he can make king, he can make emperor, and emperor I must and will be. Go." So he had to go. But as he went, he felt quite frightened, and he thought to himself, "This can't be right. To be emperor is too ambitious. The flounder will be tired out at last." Thinking this, he came to the shore. The sea was quite black and thick, and it was breaking high on the beach. The foam was flying about, and the wind was blowing. Everything looked bleak. The fisherman was chilled with fear. He stood and said, "Once a prince, but changed you be into a flounder in the sea. Come, for my wife, Ilsabel, wishes what I dare not tell." "What does she want now?" asked Flounder. "Alas, Flounder," he said, "my wife wants to be emperor." "Go home," said the Flounder. "She is that already." So the fisherman went home, and when he came, there he saw the whole castle was made of polished marble, ornamented with alabaster statues and gold. Before the gate soldiers were marching, blowing trumpets and beating drums. Inside the palace were walking barons, counts, and dukes, acting as servants. They opened the door, which was of beaten gold. And when he entered, he saw his wife upon a throne, which was made out of a single block of gold, and which was quite 6 cubits high. She had on a great golden crown, which was 3 yards high and set with brilliants and sparkling gems. In one hand she held a scepter, and in the other the imperial globe, and on either side of her stood 2 rows of halberdiers, each smaller than the other, from a 7-foot giant to the tiniest little dwarf, no higher than my little finger. Many princes and dukes were standing before her. The fisherman went up to her quietly and said, "Wife, are you emperor now?" "Yes," she said, "I am emperor." He stood looking at her magnificence, and when he had watched her for some time, said, "Ah, wife, let that be enough, now that you are emperor." "Husband," said she, "why are you standing there? I am emperor now, and I want to be pope too. Go down to the flounder." "Alas, wife," said the fisherman, "what more do you want? You cannot be pope. There is only one pope in Christendom, and he cannot make you that." "Husband," she said, "I will be pope. Go down quickly. I must be pope today." "No, wife," said the fisherman, "I can't ask him that. It is not right. It is too much. The flounder cannot make you pope." "Husband, what nonsense," said his wife. "If he can make emperor, he can make pope too. Go down this instant. I am emperor, and you are my husband. Will you be off at once?" So he was frightened and went out, but he felt quite faint and trembled and shook, and his knees and legs began to give way under him. The wind was blowing fiercely across the land, and the clouds flying across the sky looked as gloomy as if it were night. The leaves were being blown from the trees. The water was foaming and seething and dashing upon the shore, and in the distance he saw the ships in great distress, dancing and tossing on the waves. Still, the sky was very blue in the middle, although at the sides it was an angry red, as in a great storm. So he stood shuddering in anxiety, and said, "Once a prince, but changed you be into a flounder in the sea. Come, for my wife, Ilsebel, wishes what I dare not tell." "Well, what does she want now?" asked the flounder. "Alas," said the fisherman, "she wants to be pope." "Go home, then. She is that already," said the flounder. Then he went home, and when he came, there he saw, as it were, a large church surrounded by palaces. He pushed his way through the people. The interior was lit up with thousands and thousands of candles, and his wife was dressed in cloth of gold and was sitting on a much higher throne, and she wore 3 great golden crowns. Round her were numbers of church dignitaries, and on either side were standing 2 rows of tapers, the largest of them as tall as a steeple, and the smallest as tiny as a Christmas tree candle. All the emperors and kings were on their knees before her, and were kissing her foot. "Wife," said the fisherman, looking at her, "are you pope now?" "Yes," said she, "I am pope." So he stood staring at her, and it was as if he were looking at the bright sun. When he had watched her for some time, he said, "Ah, wife, let it be enough now that you are pope." But she sat as straight as a tree, and did not move or bend the least bit. He said again, "Wife, be content now that you are pope. You cannot become anything more." "We will think about that," said his wife. With these words they went to bed. But the woman was not content. Her greed would not allow her to sleep, and she kept on thinking and thinking what she could still become. The fisherman slept well and soundly, for he had done a great deal that day. But his wife could not sleep at all, and turned from one side to another the whole night long, and thought, till she could think no longer, what more she could become. Then the sun began to rise, and when she saw the red dawn, she went to the end of the bed and looked at it. And as she was watching the sun rise out of the window, she thought, "Ha! Could I not make the sun and man rise? Husband," said she, poking him in the ribs with her elbows, "wake up, go down to the flounder. I will be a god." The fisherman was still half asleep, yet he was so frightened that he fell out of bed. He thought he had not heard aright, and opened his eyes wide and said, "What did you say, wife?" "Husband," she said, "if I cannot make the sun and man rise when I appear, I cannot rest. I shall never have a quiet moment till I can make the sun and man rise." He looked at her in horror, and a shudder ran over him. "Go down at once. I will be a god." "Alas, wife," said the fisherman, falling on his knees before her, "the flounder cannot do that. Emperor and pope, he can make you. I implore you, be content and remain pope." Then she flew into a passion. Her hair hung wildly about her face. She pushed him with her foot and screamed, "I am not contented, and I shall not be contented. Will you go?" So he hurried on his clothes as fast as possible and ran away as if he were mad. But the storm was raging so fiercely that he could scarcely stand. Houses and trees were being blown down, the mountains were being shaken, and pieces of rock were rolling in the sea. The sky was as black as ink, It was thundering and lightning, and the sea was tossing in great waves as high as church towers and mountains, and each had a white crest of foam. So he shouted, not able to hear his own voice, "Once a prince, but changed you be into a flounder in the sea. Come, for my wife, Ilsabel, wishes what I dare not tell." "Well, what does she want now?" asked the flounder. "Alas," said he, "she wants to be a god." "Go home, then. She is sitting again in the hut." And there they are sitting to this day. The Golden Mermaid. A powerful king had, among many other treasures, a wonderful tree in his garden, which bore every year beautiful golden apples. But the king was never able to enjoy his treasure, for he might watch and guard them as he liked. As soon as they began to get ripe, they were always stolen. At last, in despair, he sent for his 3 sons and said to the 2 eldest, "Get yourselves ready for a journey. Take gold and silver with you, and a large retinue of servants, as beseems 2 noble princes, and go through the world till you find out who it is that steals my golden apples. And if possible, bring the thief to me, that I may punish him as he deserves." His sons were delighted at this proposal, for they had long wished to see something of the world. So they got ready for their journey with all haste, bade their father farewell, and left the town. The youngest prince was much disappointed that he too was not sent out on his travels. But his father wouldn't hear of his going, for he had always been looked upon as the stupid one of the family, and the king was afraid of something happening to him. But the prince begged and implored so long that at last his father consented to let him go, and furnished him with gold and silver as he had done his brothers. But he gave him the most wretched horse in his stable, because the foolish youth hadn't asked for a better. So he too set out on his journey to secure the thief, amid the jeers and laughter of the whole court and town. His path led him first through a wood, and he hadn't gone very far when he met a lean-looking wolf who stood still as he approached. The prince asked him if he were hungry, and when the wolf said he was, he got down from his horse and said, "If you are really as you say and look, you may take my horse and eat it." The wolf didn't wait to have the offer repeated, but set to work and soon made an end of the poor beast. When the prince saw how different the wolf looked when he had finished his meal, he said to him, "Now, my friend, since you have eaten up my horse, and I have such a long way to go, that, with the best will in the world, I couldn't manage it on foot, the least you can do for me is to act as my horse and to take me on your back." "Most certainly," said the wolf, and letting the prince mount him, he trotted gaily through the wood. After they had gone a little way, he turned round and asked his rider where he wanted to go to, and the prince proceeded to tell him the whole story of the golden apples that had been stolen out of the king's garden, and how his other 2 brothers had set forth with many followers to find the thief. When he had finished his story, the wolf, who was in reality no wolf but a mighty magician, said he thought he could tell him who the thief was and could help him to secure him. "There lives," he said, "in a neighboring country, a mighty emperor who has a beautiful golden bird in a cage, and this is the creature who steals the golden apples. But it flies so fast that it is impossible to catch it at its theft. You must slip into the emperor's palace by night and steal the bird with the cage. But be very careful not to touch the walls as you go out." The following night, the prince stole into the emperor's palace, and found the bird in its cage as the wolf had told him he would. He took hold of it carefully, but in spite of all his caution, he touched the wall in trying to pass by some sleeping watchmen. They awoke at once, and seizing him, beat him and put him into chains. Next day he was led before the emperor, who at once condemned him to death and to be thrown into a dark dungeon till the day of his execution arrived. The wolf, who, of course, knew by his magic arts all that had happened to the prince, turned himself at once into a mighty monarch with a large train of followers and proceeded to the court of the emperor, where he was received with every show of honor. The emperor and he conversed on many subjects, and, among other things, the stranger asked his host if he had many slaves. The emperor told him he had more than he knew what to do with, and that a new one had been captured that very night for trying to steal his magic bird, but that as he had already more than enough to feed and support, he was going to have this last captive hanged next morning. He must have been a most daring thief, said the king, to try and steal the magic bird, for depend upon it the creature must have been well guarded. I would really like to see this bold rascal. By all means, said the emperor, and he himself led his guest down to the dungeon where the unfortunate prince was kept prisoner. When the emperor stepped out of the cell with the king, the latter turned to him and said, "Most mighty emperor, I have been much disappointed. I had thought to find a powerful robber, and instead of that I have seen the most miserable creature I can imagine. Hanging is far too good for him. If I had to sentence him, I should make him perform some very difficult task under pain of death. If he did it so much, the better for you, and if he didn't, matters would just be as they are now, and he could still be hanged." "Your counsel," said the emperor, "is excellent, and as it happens, I've got the very thing for him to do. My nearest neighbor, who is also a mighty emperor, possesses a golden horse, which he guards most carefully. The prisoner shall be told to steal this horse and bring it to me." The prince was then let out of his dungeon and told his life would be spared if he succeeded in bringing the golden horse to the emperor. He did not feel very elated at this announcement, for he did not know how in the world he was to set about the task, and he started on his way weeping bitterly and wondering what had made him leave his father's house and kingdom. But before he had gone far, his friend the wolf stood before him and said, "Dear prince, why are you so cast down? It is true you didn't succeed in catching the bird, but don't let that discourage you, for this time you will be all the more careful and will doubtless catch the horse." With these and like words, the wolf comforted the prince and warned him specially not to touch the wall or let the horse touch it as he let it out, or he would fail in the same way as he had done with the bird. After a somewhat lengthy journey, the prince and the wolf came to the kingdom ruled over by the emperor, who possessed the golden horse. One evening late, they reached the capital, and the wolf advised the prince to set to work at once, before their presence in the city had aroused the watchfulness of the guards. They slipped unnoticed into the emperor's stables, and into the very place where there were the most guards, for there the wolf rightly surmised they would find the horse. When they came to a certain inner door, the wolf told the prince to remain outside while he went in. In a short time he returned and said, "My dear prince, the horse is most securely watched, but I have bewitched all the guards, and if you will only be careful not to touch the wall yourself, or let the horse touch it as you go out, there is no danger, and the game is yours." The prince, who had made up his mind to be more than cautious this time, went cheerfully to work. He found all the guards fast asleep, and slipping into the horse's stall, he seized it by the bridle and led it out. But unfortunately, before they had got quite clear of the stables, a gadfly stung the horse and caused it to switch its tail, whereby it touched the wall. In a moment, all the guards awoke, seized the prince, and beat him mercilessly with their horsewhips, after which they bound him with chains and flung him into a dungeon. Next morning, they brought him before the emperor, who treated him exactly as the king with the golden bird had done, and commanded him to be beheaded on the following day. When the wolf magician saw that the prince had failed this time too, he transformed himself again into a mighty king, and proceeded with an even more gorgeous retinue than the first time to the court of the emperor. He was courteously received and entertained, and once more after dinner he led the conversation on to the subject of slaves, and in the course of it again requested to be allowed to see the bold robber who had dared to break into the emperor's stable to steal his most valuable possession. The emperor consented, and all happened exactly as it had done at the court of the emperor with the golden bird. The prisoner's life was to be spared only on condition that within 3 days he should obtain possession of the Golden Mermaid, whom hitherto no mortal had ever approached. Very depressed by his dangerous and difficult task, the prince left his gloomy prison. But to his great joy, he met his friend the wolf before he had gone many miles on his journey. The cunning creature pretended he knew nothing of what had happened to the prince, and asked him how he had fared with the horse. The prince told him all about his misadventure, and the condition on which the emperor had promised to spare his life. Then, the wolf reminded him that he had twice got him out of prison, and that if he would only trust in him and do exactly as he told him, he would certainly succeed in this last undertaking. Thereupon, they bent their steps towards the sea, which stretched out before them, as far as their eyes could see, all the waves dancing and glittering in the bright sunshine. "Now," continued the wolf, "I am going to turn myself into a boat full of the most beautiful silken merchandise, and you must jump boldly into the boat and steer with my tail in your hand right out into the open sea. You will soon come upon the Golden Mermaid. Whatever you do, don't follow her if she calls you, but on the contrary, say to her, 'The buyer comes to the seller, not the seller to the buyer.' After which you must steer towards the land, and she will follow you, for she won't be able to resist the beautiful wares you have on board your ship." The prince promised faithfully to do all he had been told, whereupon the wolf changed himself into a ship full of most exquisite silks, of every shade and color imaginable. The astonished prince stepped into the boat, and, holding the wolf's tail in his hand, he steered boldly out into the open sea, where the sun was gilding the blue waves with its golden rays. Soon he saw the Golden Mermaid swimming near the ship, beckoning and calling to him to follow her. But mindful of the wolf's warning, he told her in a loud voice that if she wished to buy anything, she must come to him. With these words, he turned his magic ship round and steered back towards the land. The mermaid called out to him to stand still, but he refused to listen to her and never paused till he reached the sand of the shore. Here he stopped and waited for the mermaid, who had swum after him. When she drew near the boat, he saw that she was far more beautiful than any mortal he had ever beheld. She swam round the ship for some time, and then swung herself gracefully on board in order to examine the beautiful silken stuffs more closely. Then the prince seized her in his arms, and kissing her tenderly on the cheeks and lips, he told her she was his forever. At the same moment, the boat turned into a wolf again, which so terrified the mermaid that she clung to the prince for protection. So the Golden Mermaid was successfully caught, and she soon felt quite happy in her new life when she saw she had nothing to fear either from the prince or the wolf. She rode on the back of the latter, and the prince rode behind her. When they reached the country ruled over by the emperor with the golden horse, the prince jumped down, and helping the mermaid to alight, he led her before the emperor. At the sight of the beautiful mermaid and of the grim wolf, who stuck close to the prince this time, the guards all made respectful obeisance, and soon the three stood before his imperial majesty. When the emperor heard from the prince how he had gained possession of his fair prize, he at once recognized that he had been helped by some magic art, and on the spot gave up all claim to the beautiful mermaid. "Dear youth," he said, "forgive me for my shameful conduct to you, and as a sign that you pardon me, accept the golden horse as a present. I acknowledge your power to be greater even than I can understand, for you have succeeded in gaining possession of the Golden Mermaid, whom hitherto no mortal has ever been able to approach." Then they all sat down to a huge feast, and the prince had to relate his adventures all over again, to the wonder and astonishment of the whole company. But the prince was wearying now to return to his own kingdom, so as soon as the feast was over, he took farewell of the emperor and set out on his homeward way. He lifted the mermaid onto the golden horse and swung himself up behind her. And so they rode on merrily, with the wolf trotting behind, till they came to the country of the emperor with the golden bird. The renown of the prince and his adventure had gone before him, and the emperor sat on his throne awaiting the arrival of the prince and his companions. When the three rode into the courtyard of the palace, they were surprised and delighted to find everything festively illuminated and decorated for their reception. When the prince and the Golden Mermaid, with the wolf behind them, mounted the steps of the palace, the emperor came forward to meet them and led them to the throne room. At the same moment a servant appeared with the golden bird in its golden cage, and the emperor begged the prince to accept it with his love, and to forgive him the indignity he had suffered at his hands. Then the emperor bent low before the beautiful mermaid, and, offering her his arm, he led her into dinner, closely followed by the prince and her friend, the wolf, the latter seating himself at table, not the least embarrassed that no one had invited him to do so. As soon as the sumptuous meal was over, the prince and his mermaid took leave of the emperor, and seating themselves on the golden horse, continued their homeward journey. On the way, the wolf turned to the prince and said, "Dear friends, I must now bid you farewell, but I leave you under such happy circumstances that I cannot feel our parting to be a sad one." The prince was very unhappy when he heard these words, and begged the wolf to stay with them always. But this the good creature refused to do, though he thanked the prince kindly for his invitation, and called out as he disappeared into the thicket, "Should any evil befall you, dear prince, at any time, you may rely on my friendship and gratitude." These were the wolf's parting words, and the prince could not restrain his tears when he saw his friend vanishing in the distance. But one glance at his beloved mermaid soon cheered him up again, and they continued on their journey merrily. The news of his son's adventures had already reached his father's court, and everyone was more than astonished at the success of the once despised prince. His elder brothers, who had in vain gone in pursuit of the thief of the golden apples, were furious over their younger brother's good fortune and plotted and planned how they were to kill him. They hid themselves in the wood through which the prince had to pass on his way to the palace, and there fell on him. And, having beaten him to death, they carried off the golden horse and the golden bird. But nothing they could do would persuade the Golden Mermaid to go with them or move from the spot. For ever since she had left the sea, she had so attached herself to her prince that she asked nothing else than to live or die with him. For many weeks, the poor mermaid sat and watched over the dead body of her lover, weeping salt tears over his loss, when suddenly, one day their old friend the wolf appeared and said, "Cover the prince's body with all the leaves and flowers you can find in the wood." The maiden did as he told her, and then the wolf breathed over the flowery grave. And lo and behold, the prince lay there sleeping as peacefully as a child. "Now you may wake him if you like," said the wolf, and the mermaid bent over him and gently kissed the wounds his brothers had made on his forehead, and the prince awoke. And you may imagine how delighted he was to find his beautiful mermaid beside him, though he felt a little depressed when he thought of the loss of the golden bird and the golden horse. After a time, the wolf, who had likewise fallen on the prince's neck, advised them to continue their journey. And once more the prince and his lovely bride mounted on the faithful beast's back. The king's joy was great when he embraced his youngest son, for he had long since despaired of his return. He received the wolf and the beautiful golden mermaid most cordially too, and the prince was made to tell his adventures all over from the beginning. The poor old father grew very sad when he heard of the shameful conduct of his elder sons, and had them called before him. They turned as white as death when they saw their brother, whom they thought they had murdered, standing beside them alive and well. And so startled were they that when the king asked them why they had behaved so wickedly to their brother, they could think of no lie, but confessed at once that they had slain the young prince in order to obtain possession of the golden horse and the golden bird. Their father's wrath knew no bounds, and he ordered them both to be banished. But he could not do enough to honor his youngest son, and his marriage with the beautiful mermaid was celebrated with much pomp and magnificence. When the festivities were over, the wolf bade them all farewell, and returned once more to his life in the woods, much to the regret of the old king and the young prince and his bride. And so ended the adventures of the prince with his friend the wolf. The Crystal Coffin. Now let no one say that a poor tailor can't get on in the world, and indeed even attain to very high honor. Nothing is required but to set the right way to work. But of course, the really important thing is to succeed. A very bright, active young tailor once set off on his travels, which led him into a wood, and as he did not know the way, he soon lost himself. Night came on, and there seemed to be nothing for it but to seek out the best resting place he could find. He could have made himself quite comfortable with a bed of soft moss, but the fear of wild beasts disturbed his mind, and at last he determined to spend the night in a tree. He sought out a tall oak tree, climbed up to the top, and felt devoutly thankful that his big smoothing iron was in his pocket, for the wind in the treetops was so high that he might easily have been blown away altogether. After passing some hours of the night, not without considerable fear and trembling, he noticed a light shining at a little distance, and hoping it might proceed from some house where he could find a better shelter than in the top of the tree, he cautiously descended and went towards the light. It led him to a little hut all woven together of reeds and rushes. He knocked bravely at the door, which opened, and by the light which shone from within, he saw an old gray-haired man, dressed in a coat made of bright-colored patches. "Who are you, and what do you want?" asked the old man roughly. "I am a poor tailor," replied the youth. "I have been benighted in the forest, and I entreat you to let me take shelter in your hut till morning." "Go your way," said the old man in a sulky tone. "I'll have nothing to do with tramps. You must just go elsewhere." With these words he tried to slip back into his house, but the tailor laid hold of his coat-tails and begged so hard to be allowed to stay that the old fellow, who was by no means as cross as he appeared, was at length touched by his entreaties, let him come in, and after giving him some food, showed him quite a nice bed in one corner of the room. The weary tailor required no rocking to rest, but slept sound till early morning, when he was roused from his slumbers by a tremendous noise. Loud screams and shouts pierced the thin walls of the little hut. The tailor, with new-born courage, sprang up, threw on his clothes with all speed, and hurried out. There he saw a huge black bull engaged in a terrible fight with a fine, large stag. They rushed at each other with such fury that the ground seemed to tremble under them, and the whole air to be filled with their cries. For some time it appeared quite uncertain which would be the victor. But at length the stag drove his antlers with such force into his opponent's body that the bull fell to the ground with a terrific roar, and a few more strokes finished him. The tailor, who had been watching the fight with amazement, was still standing motionless when the stag bounded up to him, and before he had time to escape, forked him up with its great antlers and set off at full gallop over hedges and ditches, hill and dale, through wood and water. The tailor could do nothing but hold on tight with both hands to the stag's horns and resign himself to his fate. He felt as if he were flying along. At length, the stag paused before a steep rock and gently let the tailor down to the ground. Feeling more dead than alive, he paused for a while to collect his scattered senses, but when he seemed somewhat restored, the stag struck such a blow on a door in the rock that it flew open. Flames of fire rushed forth, and such clouds of steam followed that the stag had to avert its eyes. The tailor could not think what to do or which way to turn to get away from this awful wilderness, and to find his way back amongst human beings once more. As he stood hesitating, a voice from the rock cried to him, "Step in without fear, no harm shall befall you." He still lingered, but some mysterious power seemed to impel him, and passing through the door, he found himself in a spacious hall, whose ceiling, walls, and floor were covered with polished tiles, carved all over with unknown figures. He gazed about, full of wonder, and was just preparing to walk out again when the same voice bade him, "Tread on the stone in the middle of the hall, and good luck will attend you." By this time he had grown so courageous that he did not hesitate to obey the order, and hardly had he stepped on the stone than it began to sink gently with him into the depths below. On reaching firm ground, he found himself in a hall of much the same size as the upper one, but with much more in it to wonder at and admire. Round the walls were several niches, in each of which stood glass vessels filled with some bright-colored spirit or bluish smoke. On the floor stood 2 large crystal boxes opposite each other, and these attracted his curiosity at once. Stepping up to one of them, he saw within it what looked like a model in miniature of a fine castle, surrounded by farms, barns, stables, and a number of other buildings. Everything was quite tiny, but so beautifully and carefully finished that it might have been the work of an accomplished artist. He would have continued gazing much longer at this remarkable curiosity, had not the voice desired him to turn round and look at the crystal coffin which stood opposite. What was his amazement at seeing a girl of surpassing loveliness lying in it. She lay as though sleeping, and her long fair hair seemed to wrap her round like some costly mantle. Her eyes were closed, but the bright color in her face and the movement of a ribbon, which rose and fell with her breath, left no doubt as to her being alive. As the tailor stood gazing at her with a beating heart, the maiden suddenly opened her eyes and started with delighted surprise. "Great heavens!" she cried. "My deliverance approaches. Quick, quick, help me out of my prison. Only push back the bolt of this coffin and I am free." The tailor promptly obeyed when she quickly pushed back the crystal lid, stepped out of the coffin and hurried to a corner of the hall, when she proceeded to wrap herself in a large cloak. Then she sat down on a stone, desired the young man to come near, and, giving him an affectionate kiss, she said, "My long-hoped-for deliverer, kind heaven has led you to me, and has at length put an end to all my sufferings. You are my destined husband, and beloved by me, and endowed with every kind of riches and power. You shall spend the remainder of your life in peace and happiness. Now, sit down and hear my story. I am the daughter of a wealthy nobleman. My parents died when I was very young, and they left me to the care of my eldest brother, by whom I was carefully educated. We loved each other so tenderly, and our tastes and interests were so much alike that we determined never to marry, but to spend our entire lives together. There was no lack of society at our home. Friends and neighbors paid us frequent visits, and we kept open house for all. Thus it happened that one evening a stranger rode up to the castle and asked for hospitality, as he could not reach the nearest town that night. We granted his request with ready courtesy, and during supper he entertained us with most agreeable conversation, mingled with amusing anecdotes. My brother took such a fancy to him that he pressed him to spend a couple of days with us, which, after a little hesitation, the stranger consented to do. We rose late from table, and whilst my brother was showing our guest to his room, I hurried to mine, for I was very tired and longed to get to bed. I had hardly dropped off to sleep when I was roused by the sound of some soft and charming music. Wondering whence it could come, I was about to call to my maid who slept in the room next mine, when, to my surprise, I felt as if some heavy weight on my chest had taken all power from me, and I lay there unable to utter the slightest sound. Meantime, by the light of the night lamp, I saw the stranger enter my room, though the double doors had been securely locked. He drew near and told me that through the power of his magic arts, he had caused the soft music to waken me, and had made his way through bolts and bars to offer me his hand and heart. My repugnance to his magic was so great that I would not condescend to give any answer. He waited motionless for some time, hoping no doubt for a favorable reply. But as I continued silent, he angrily declared that he would find means to punish my pride, and therewith he left the room in a rage. I spent the night in the greatest agitation, and only fell into a doze towards morning. As soon as I awoke, I jumped up and hurried to tell my brother all that had happened. But he had left his room, and his servant told me that he had gone out at daybreak to hunt with the stranger. My mind misgave me. I dressed in all haste, had my palfrey saddled, and rode of at full gallop towards the forest, attended by one servant only. I pushed on without pausing, and ere long I saw the stranger coming towards me, and leading a fine stag. I asked him where he had left my brother, and how he had got the stag, whose great eyes were overflowing with tears. Instead of answering, he began to laugh, and I flew into such a rage that I drew a pistol and fired at him. But the bullet rebounded from his breast and struck my horse in the forehead. I fell to the ground, and the stranger muttered some words, which robbed me of my senses. When I came to myself, I was lying in a crystal coffin in this subterranean vault. The magician appeared again, and told me that he had transformed my brother into a stag, had reduced our castle and all its defenses to miniature, and locked them up in a glass box, and after turning all our household into different vapors, had banished them into glass phials. If I would only yield to his wishes, he could easily open these vessels, and all would then resume their former shapes. I would not say a word more than I had done previously, and he vanished, leaving me in my prison, where a deep sleep soon fell on me. Amongst the many dreams which floated through my brain was a cheering one of a young man who was to come and release me. And today, when I opened my eyes, I recognized you and saw that my dream was fulfilled. Now help me to carry out the rest of my vision. The first thing is to place the glass box, which contains my castle, on this large stone. As soon as this was done, the stone gently rose through the air and transported them into the upper hall, whence they easily carried the box into the outer air. The lady then removed the lid, and it was marvelous to watch the castle, houses, and farmyards begin to grow and spread themselves till they had regained their proper size. Then the young couple returned by means of the movable stone and brought up all the glass vessels filled with smoke. No sooner were they uncorked than the blue vapors poured out and became transformed to living people, in whom the lady joyfully recognized her many servants and attendants. Her delight was complete when her brother, who had killed the magician under the form of a bull, was seen coming from the forest in his proper shape, and that very day, according to her promise, she gave her hand in marriage to the happy young tailor. The 3 snake leaves. There was once a poor man who could no longer afford to keep his only son at home. So the son said to him, "Dear father, you are so poor that I am only a burden to you. I would rather go out into the world and see if I can earn my own living." The father gave him his blessing and took leave of him with much sorrow. About this time, the king of a very powerful kingdom was carrying on a war. The youth therefore took service under him and went on the campaign. When they came before the enemy, a battle took place. There was some hot fighting, and it rained bullets so thickly that his comrades fell around him on all sides. And when their leader fell too, the rest wished to take to flight, but the youth stepped forward and encouraged them and called out, We must not let our country be ruined." Then others followed him, and he pressed on and defeated the enemy. When the king heard that he had to thank him alone for the victory, he raised him higher than anyone else in rank, gave him great treasures, and made him the first in the kingdom. The king had a daughter who was very beautiful, but she was also very capricious. She had made a vow to marry no one who would not promise her that if she died first, he would allow himself to be buried alive with her. "If he loves me truly," she used to say, "what use would life be to him then?" At the same time, she was willing to do the same, and if he died first, to be buried with him. This curious vow had up to this time frightened away all suitors, but the young man was so captivated by her beauty that he hesitated at nothing and asked her hand of her father. "Do you know," asked the king, "what you have to promise?" "I shall have to go into her grave with her," he answered, "if I outlive her, but my love is so great that I do not think of the risk." So the king consented, and the wedding was celebrated with great splendor. Now they lived for a long time, very happily with one another. But then it came to pass that the young queen fell seriously ill, and no doctor could save her. And when she lay dead, the young king remembered what he had promised, and it made him shudder to think of lying in her grave alive. But there was no escape. The king had set guards before all the gates, and it was not possible to avoid his fate. When the day arrived on which the corpse was to be laid in the royal vault, he was led thither. Then the entrance was bolted and closed up. Near the coffin stood a table on which were placed 4 candles, 4 loaves of bread, and 4 bottles of wine. As soon as this provision came to an end, he would have to die. So he sat there full of grief and misery, eating every day only a tiny bit of bread, and drinking only a mouthful of ovine. And he watched death creeping nearer and nearer to him. One day, as he was sitting staring moodily in front of him, he saw a snake creep out of the corner towards the corpse. Thinking it was going to touch it, he drew his sword, and saying, "As long as I am alive, you shall not harm her," he cut it in 3 pieces. After a little time, a second snake crept out of the corner, but when it saw the first one lying dead, and in pieces it went back and came again soon, holding 3 green leaves in its mouth. Then it took the 3 bits of the snake and laid them in order, and put one of the leaves on each wound. Immediately the pieces joined together. The snake moved itself and became alive, and then both hurried away. The leaves remained lying on the ground, and it suddenly occurred to the unfortunate man who had seen everything that the wonderful power of the leaves might also be exercised upon a human being. So he picked up the leaves and laid one of them on the mouth and the other 2 on the eyes of the dead woman. And scarcely had he done this before the blood began to circulate in her veins. Then it mounted and brought color back to her white face. Then she drew her breath, opened her eyes, and said, "Ah, where am I?" "You are with me, dear lady," he answered, and told her all that had happened, and how he had brought her to life again. He then gave her some wine and bread, and when all her strength had returned, she got up, and they went to the door and knocked and called so loudly that the guards heard them, and told the king. The king came himself to open the door, and there he found both happy and well, and he rejoiced with them that now all trouble was over. But the young king gave the 3 snake leaves to a servant, saying to him, "Keep them carefully for me, and always carry them with you. Who knows but that they may help us in a time of need?" It seemed, however, as if a change had come over the young queen after she had been restored to life, and as if all her love for her husband had faded from her heart. Some time afterwards, when he wanted to take a journey over the sea to his old father, and they were on board the ship, she forgot the great love and faithfulness he had shown her and how he had saved her from death, and fell in love with the captain. And one day when the young king was lying asleep, she called the captain to her and seized the head of the sleeping king and made him take his feet, and together they threw him into the sea. When they had done this wicked deed, she said to him, "Now let us go home and say that he died on the journey. I will praise you so much to my father that he will marry me to you and make you the heir to the throne." But the faithful servant who had seen everything let down a little boat into the sea, unobserved by them, and rowed after his master while the traitors sailed on. He took the drowned man out of the water, and with the help of the 3 snake leaves which he carried with him, placing them on his mouth and eyes, he brought him to life again. They both rowed as hard as they could, night and day, and their little boat went so quickly that they reached the old king before the other 2 did. He was much astonished to see them come back alone, and asked what had happened to them. When he heard the wickedness of his daughter, he said, "I cannot believe that she has acted so wrongly, but the truth will soon come to light." He made them both go into a secret chamber and let no one see them. Soon after this, the large ship came in, and the wicked lady appeared before her father with a very sad face. He said to her, "Why have you come back alone? Where is your husband?" "Ah, dear father," she replied, "I have come home in great grief. My husband fell ill on the voyage quite suddenly and died, and if the good captain had not given me help, I should have died too. He was at his deathbed and can tell you everything." The king said, "I will bring the dead to life again." And he opened the door of the room and called them both out. The lady was as if thunderstruck when she caught sight of her husband. She fell on her knees and begged for mercy. But the king said, "You shall have no mercy. He was ready to die with you and restored you to life again. But you killed him when he was sleeping, and shall receive your deserts." So she and her accomplice were put in a ship which was bored through with holes, and were drawn out into the sea, where they soon perished in the waves. The Golden Lads. A poor man and his wife lived in a little cottage, where they supported themselves by catching fish in the nearest river, and got on as best they could, living from hand to mouth. One day it happened that when the fisherman drew in his net, he found in it a remarkable fish, for it was entirely of gold. As he was inspecting it with some surprise, the fish opened its mouth and said, "Listen to me, fisher. If you will just throw me back into the water, I'll turn your poor little cottage into a splendid castle." The fisher replied, "What good, pray, will a castle be to me if I have nothing to eat in it?" "Oh," said the goldfish, "I'll take care of that. There will be a cupboard in the castle in which you will find dishes of every kind of food you can wish for most." "If that's the case," said the man, "I've no objection to oblige you." "Yes," observed the fish, "but there is one condition attached to my offer, and that is that you are not to reveal to a soul where your good fortune comes from. If you say a word about it, it will all vanish." The man threw the fish back into the water and went home. But on the spot where his cottage used to stand, he found a spacious castle. He opened his eyes wide went in and found his wife dressed out in smart clothes, sitting in a splendidly furnished drawing room. She was in high spirits and cried out, "Oh, husband, how can this all have happened? I am so pleased." "Yes," said her husband, "so am I pleased, but I'm uncommonly hungry, and I want something to eat at once." Said his wife, "I've got nothing, and I don't know where anything is in this new house." "Never mind," replied the man. "I see a big cupboard there. Suppose you unlock it." When the cupboard was opened, they found meat, cakes, fruit, and wine, all spread out in the most tempting fashions. The wife clapped her hands with joy and cried, "Dear heart, what more can one wish for?" And they sat down and ate and drank. When they had finished, the wife asked, "But husband, where do all these riches come from?" "Ah," said he, "don't ask me. I dare not tell you. If I reveal the secret to anyone, it will be all up with us." "Very well," she replied. "If I'm not to be told, of course I don't want to know anything about it." But she was not really in earnest, for her curiosity never left her a moment's peace by day or night, and she teased and worried her husband to such a pitch that at length he quite lost patience and blurted out that it all came from a wonderful golden fish which he had caught and set free again. Hardly were the words well out of his mouth when castle, cupboard, and all vanished, and there they were sitting in their poor little fishing hut once more. The man had to betake himself to his former trade and set to fishing again. As luck would have it, he caught the golden fish a second time. "Now listen," said the fish. "If you'll throw me back into the water, I'll give you back the castle and the cupboard with all its good things. But now take care, and don't for your life betray where you got them, or you'll just lose them again." "I'll be very careful," promised the fisher, and threw the fish back into the water. When he went home, he found all their former splendor restored, and his wife overjoyed at their good fortune. But her curiosity still continued to torment her, and after restraining it with a great effort for a couple of days, she began questioning her husband again as to what had happened and how he had managed. The man kept silence for some time, but at last she irritated him so much that he burst out with the secret, and in one moment the castle was gone, and they sat once more in their wretched old hut. "There," exclaimed the man, "you would have it. Now we may just go on short commons." "Ah," said his wife, "after all, I'd rather not have all the riches in the world if I can't know where they come from. I shall not have a moment's peace." The man took to his fishing again, and one day fate brought the gold fish into his net for the third time. "Well," said the fish, "I see that I am evidently destined to fall into your hands. Now take me home and cut me into 6 pieces. Give 2 bits to your wife to eat, 2 to your horse, and plant the remaining 2 in your garden, and they will bring you a blessing." The man carried the fish home and did exactly as he had been told. After a time, it came to pass that from the 2 pieces he had planted in the garden, 2 golden lilies grew up, and that his horse had 2 golden foals, whilst his wife gave birth to twin boys who were all golden. The children grew up both tall and handsome, and the foals and the lilies grew with them. One day the children came to their father and said, "Father, we want to mount on golden steeds and ride forth to see the world." Their father answered sadly, "How can I bear it if, when you are far away, I know nothing about you?" And they said, "The golden lilies will tell you all about us if you look at them. If they seem to droop, you will know we are ill. And if they fall down and fade away, It will be a sign we are dead." So off they rode, and came to an inn where were a number of people, who, as soon as they saw the two golden lads, began to laugh and jeer at them. When one of them heard this, his heart failed him, and he thought he would go no further into the world. So he turned back and rode home to his father. But his brother rode on till he reached the outskirts of a huge forest. Here he was told, "It will never do for you to ride through the forest. It is full of robbers, and you're sure to come to grief, especially when they see that you and your horse are golden. They will certainly fall on you and kill you." However, he was not to be intimidated, but said, "I must and will ride on." So he procured some bear's skins and covered himself and his horse with them, so that not a particle of gold could be seen, and then rode bravely on into the heart of the forest. When he had got some way, he heard a rustling through the bushes, and presently a sound of voices. Someone whispered on one side of him, "There goes someone," and was answered from the other side, "Oh, let him pass. He's only a bear-keeper, and as poor as any church mouse." So Golden Lad rode through the forest, and no harm befell him. One day he came to a village, where he saw a girl who struck him as being the loveliest creature in the whole world. And as he felt a great love for her, he went up to her and said, "I love you with all my heart. Will you be my wife?" And the girl liked him so much that she put her hand in his and replied, "Yes, I will be your wife, and will be true to you as long as I live." So they were married, and in the middle of all the festivities and rejoicings, the bride's father came home, and was not a little surprised at finding his daughter celebrating her wedding. He inquired, "And who is the bridegroom?" Then someone pointed out to him the golden lad, who was still wrapped up in the bear's skin, and the father exclaimed angrily, "Never shall a mere bear-keeper have my daughter," and tried to rush at him and kill him. But the bride did all she could to pacify him, and begged hard, saying, "After all, he is my husband, and I love him with all my heart." So that at length he gave in. However, he could not dismiss the thought from his mind, and next morning he rose very early, for he felt he must go and look at his daughter's husband, and see whether he really was nothing better than a mere ragged beggar. So he went to his son-in-law's room, and who should he see lying in the bed but a splendid golden man, and the rough bearskin thrown on the ground close by. Then he slipped quietly away, and thought to himself, "How lucky that I managed to control my rage. I should certainly have committed a great crime." Meantime, the golden lad dreamt that he was out hunting, and was giving chase to a noble stag. And when he woke, he said to his bride, "I must go off and hunt." She felt very anxious, and begged he would stay at home, adding, "Some mishap might so easily befall you." But he answered, "I must and will go." So he went off into the forest, and before long a fine stag, such as he had seen in his dream, stopped just in front of him. He took aim and was about to fire, when the stag bounded away. Then he started off in pursuit, making his way through bushes and briars, and never stopped all day. But in the evening the stag entirely disappeared, and when Golden Lad came to look about him, he found himself just opposite a hut in which lived a witch. He knocked at the door, which was opened by a little old woman who asked, "What do you want at this late hour in the midst of this great forest?" He said, "Haven't you seen a stag about here?" "Yes," said she, "I know the stag well." And as she spoke, a little dog ran out of the house and began barking and snapping at the stranger. "Be quiet, you little toad," he cried, "or I'll shoot you dead." Then the witch flew into a great rage and screamed out, "What? You'll kill my dog, will you?" And the next moment he was turned to stone and lay there immovable, whilst his bride waited for him in vain and thought to herself, "Alas, no doubt the evil I feared, and which has made my heart so heavy, has befallen him." Meantime, the other brother was standing near the golden lilies at home, when suddenly one of them bent over and fell to the ground. "Good heavens!" cried he, "some great misfortune has befallen my brother. I must set off at once. Perhaps I may still be in time to save him." His father entreated him, "Stay at home. If I should lose you too, what would become of me?" But his son replied, "I must and will go." Then he mounted his golden horse and rode off till he reached the forest where his brother lay transformed to stone. The old witch came out of her house and called to him, for she would gladly have cast her spells on him too, but he took care not to go near her and called out, "Restore my brother to life at once, or I'll shoot you down on the spot." Reluctantly, she touched the stone with her finger, and in a moment it resumed its human shape. The two golden lads fell into each other's arms and kissed each other with joy, and then rode off together to the edge of the forest, where they parted, one to return to his old father, and the other to his bride. When the former got home, his father said, "I knew you had delivered your brother, for all of a sudden the golden lily reared itself up and burst into blossom. Then they all lived happily to their lives' ends, and all things went well with them." Jack my Hedgehog. There was once a farmer who lived in great comfort. He had both lands and money, but though he was so well off, one thing was wanting to complete his happiness. He had no children. Many and many a time, when he met other farmers at the nearest market town, they would tease him, asking how it came about that he was childless. At length, he grew so angry that he exclaimed, "I must and will have a child of some sort or kind, even should it only be a hedgehog." Not long after this, his wife gave birth to a child. But though the lower half of the little creature was a fine boy, from the waist upwards it was a hedgehog, so that when his mother first saw him, she was quite frightened, and said to her husband, "There now, you have cursed the child yourself." The farmer said, "What's the use of making a fuss? I suppose the creature must be christened, but I don't see how we are to ask anyone to be sponsor to him. And what are we to call him?" "There is nothing we can possibly call him but Jack my Hedgehog," replied the wife. So they took him to be christened, and the parson said, "You'll never be able to put that child in a decent bed on account of his prickles." Which was true, but they shook down some straw for him behind the stove, and there he lay for 8 years. His father grew very tired of him, and often wished him dead, but he did not die, but lay on there year after year. Now one day there was a big fair at the market town to which the farmer meant to go, so he asked his wife what he should bring her from it. "Some meat and a couple of big loaves for the house," said she. Then he asked the maid what she wanted, and she said a pair of slippers and some stockings. Lastly he said, "Well, Jack my Hedgehog, and what shall I bring you?" "Daddy," said he, "do bring me a bagpipe." When the farmer came home, he gave his wife and the maid the things they had asked for. And then he went behind the stove and gave Jack my Hedgehog the bagpipes. When Jack had got his bagpipes, he said, "Daddy, do go to the smithy and have the house cock-shod for me. Then I'll ride off and trouble you no more." His father, who was delighted at the prospect of getting rid of him, had the cock shod, and when it was ready, Jack my Hedgehog mounted on its back and rode off to the forest, followed by all the pigs and asses which he had promised to look after. Having reached the forest, he made the cock fly up to the top of a very tall tree with him, and there he sat looking after his pigs and donkeys. And he sat on and on for several years till he had quite a big herd. But all this time, his father knew nothing about him. As he sat up in his tree, he played away on his pipes and drew the loveliest music from them. As he was playing one day, a king who had lost his way happened to pass close by, and hearing the music he was much surprised, and sent one of his servants to find out where it came from. The man peered about, but he could see nothing but a little creature, which looked like a cock with a hedgehog sitting on it, perched up in a tree. The king desired the servant to ask the strange creature why it sat there, and if it knew the shortest way to his kingdom. On this, Jack my Hedgehog stepped down from his tree, and said he would undertake to show the king his way home, if the king on his part would give him his written promise to let him have whatever first met him on his return. The king thought to himself, "That's easy enough to promise. The creature won't understand a word about it, so I can just write what I choose." So he took pen and ink and wrote something, and when he had done, Jack my Hedgehog pointed out the way, and the king got safely home. Now, when the king's daughter saw her father returning in the distance, she was so delighted that she ran to meet him and threw herself into his arms. Then the king remembered Jack my Hedgehog, and he told his daughter how he had been obliged to give a written promise to bestow whatever he first met when he got home on an extraordinary creature, which had shown him the way. The creature, said he, rode on a cock as though it had been a horse, and it made lovely music. But as it certainly could not read, he had just written that he would not give it anything at all. At this, the princess was quite pleased, and said how cleverly her father had managed, for that, of course, nothing would induce her to have gone off with Jack my Hedgehog. Meantime, Jack minded his asses and pigs, sat aloft in his tree, played his bagpipes, and was always merry and cheery. After a time, it so happened that another king, having lost his way, passed by with his servants and escort, wondering how he could find his way home, for the forest was very vast. He too heard the music, and told one of his men to find out whence it came. The man came under the tree, and looking up to the top, there he saw Jack my Hedgehog astride on the cock. The servant asked Jack what he was doing up there. "I'm minding my pigs and donkeys, but what do you want?" was the reply. Then the servant told him they had lost their way, and wanted someone to show it them. Down came Jack my Hedgehog with his cock, and told the old king he would show him the right way if he would solemnly promise to give him the first thing he met in front of his royal castle. The king said yes, and gave Jack a written promise to that effect. Then Jack rode on in front, pointing out the way, and the king reached his own country in safety. Now he had an only daughter who was extremely beautiful, and who, delighted at her father's return, ran to meet him, threw her arms round his neck, and kissed him heartily. Then she asked where he had been wandering so long, and he told her how he had lost his way, and might never have reached home at all but for a strange creature, half man, half hedgehog, which rode a cock and sat up in a tree making lovely music, and which had shown him the right way. He also told her how he had been obliged to pledge his word to give the creature the first thing which met him, outside his castle gate, and he felt very sad at the thought that she had been the first thing to meet him. But the princess comforted him, and said she should be quite willing to go with Jack my Hedgehog whenever he came to fetch her, because of the great love she bore to her dear old father. Jack my Hedgehog continued to herd his pigs, and they increased in number till there were so many that the forest seemed full of them. So he made up his mind to live there no longer, and sent a message to his father telling him to have all the stables and outhouses in the village cleared, as he was going to bring such an enormous herd that all who would might kill what they chose. His father was much vexed at this news, for he thought Jack had died long ago. Jack my Hedgehog mounted his cock, and driving his pigs before him into the village, he let everyone kill as many as they chose, and such a hacking and hewing of pork went on as you might have heard for miles off. Then Jack my Hedgehog set off for the first kingdom, and there the king had given strict orders that if anyone should be seen riding a cock and carrying a bagpipe, he was to be chased away and shot at, and on no account to be allowed to enter the palace. So, when Jack my Hedgehog rode up, the guards charged him with their bayonets, but he put spurs to his cock, flew up over the gate right to the king's windows, let himself down on the sill, and called out that if he was not given what had been promised him, both the king and his daughter should pay for it with their lives. Then the king coaxed and entreated his daughter to go with Jack, and so save both their lives. Then Jack my Hedgehog rode on with his cock and bagpipes to the country of the second king, to whom he had shown the way. Now this king had given orders that, in the event of Jack's coming, the guards were to present arms, the people to cheer, and he was to be conducted in triumph to the royal palace. When the king's daughter saw Jack my Hedgehog, she was a good deal startled, for he certainly was very peculiar looking. But after all, she considered that she had given her word, and it couldn't be helped. So she made Jack welcome, and they were betrothed to each other. And at dinner he sat next her at the royal table, and they ate and drank together. When they retired to rest, the princess feared lest Jack should kiss her because of his prickles, but he told her not to be alarmed, as no harm should befall her. Then he begged the old king to place a watch of 4 men just outside his bedroom door, and to desire them to make a big fire. When he was about to lie down in bed, he would creep out of his hedgehog's skin and leave it lying at the bedside. Then the men must rush in, throw the skin into the fire, and stand by till it was entirely burnt up. And so it was. For when it struck 11, Jack my Hedgehog went to his room, took off his skin, and left it at the foot of the bed. The men rushed in, quickly seized the skin, and threw it on the fire, and directly it was all burnt. Jack was released from his enchantment, and lay in his bed a man from head to foot, but quite black, as though he had been severely scorched. The king sent off for his physician in ordinary, who washed Jack all over with various essences and salves, so that he became white and was a remarkably handsome young man. When the king's daughter saw him, she was greatly pleased, and next day the marriage ceremony was performed, and the old king bestowed his kingdom on Jack my Hedgehog. After some years, Jack and his wife went to visit his father, but the farmer did not recognize him and declared he had no son. He had had one, but that one was born with bristles like a hedgehog and had gone off into the wide world. Then Jack told his story, and his old father rejoiced and returned to live with him in his kingdom. The Riddle. A king's son once had a great desire to travel through the world, so he started off, taking no one with him but one trusty servant. One day he came to a great forest, and as evening drew on he could find no shelter, and could not think where to spend the night. All of a sudden he saw a girl going towards a little house, and as he drew nearer, he remarked that she was both young and pretty. He spoke to her and said, "Dear child, could I and my servant spend the night in this house?" "Oh, yes," said the girl in a sad tone. "You can if you like, but I should not advise you to do so. Better not go in." "Why not?" asked the king's son. The girl sighed and answered, "My stepmother deals in black arts, and she is not very friendly to strangers." The prince guessed easily that he had fallen on a witch's house, but as by this time it was quite dark and he could go no further, and as moreover he was not at all afraid, he stepped in. An old woman sat in an armchair near the fire, and as the strangers entered she turned her red eyes on them. "Good evening," she muttered, and pretending to be quite friendly. "Won't you sit down?" She blew up the fire on which she was cooking something in a little pot, and her daughter secretly warned the travelers to be very careful not to eat or drink anything, as the old woman's brews were apt to be dangerous. They went to bed and slept soundly till morning. When they were ready to start, and the king's son had already mounted his horse, the old woman said, "Wait a minute, I must give you a stirrup cup." Whilst she went to fetch it, the king's son rode off, and the servant who had waited to tighten his saddle girths was alone when the witch returned. "Take that to your master," she said. But as she spoke, the glass cracked and the poison spurted over the horse, and it was so powerful that the poor creature sank down dead. The servant ran after his master and told him what had happened, and then, not wishing to lose the saddle as well as the horse, he went back to fetch it. When he got to the spot, he saw that a raven had perched on the carcass and was pecking at it. "Who knows whether we shall get anything better to eat today?" said the servant, and he shot the raven and carried it off. Then they rode on all day through the forest without coming to the end. At nightfall they reached an inn, which they entered, and the servant gave the landlord the raven to dress for their supper. Now, as it happened, this inn was a regular resort of a band of murderers, and the old witch, too, was in the habit of frequenting it. As soon as it was dark, 12 murderers arrived, with the full intention of killing and robbing the strangers. Before they set to work, however, they sat down to table, and the landlord and the old witch joined them, and they all ate some broth in which the flesh of the raven had been stewed down. They had hardly taken a couple of spoonfuls when they all fell down dead, for the poison had passed from the horse to the raven, and so into the broth. So there was no one left belonging to the house but the landlord's daughter, who was a good, well-meaning girl, and had taken no part in all the evil doings. She opened all the doors, and showed the strangers the treasures the robbers had gathered together, but the prince bade her keep them all for herself, as he wanted none of them, and so he rode further with his servant. After traveling about for some length of time, they reached a town where lived a lovely but most arrogant princess. She had given out that anyone who asked her a riddle, which she found herself unable to guess, should be her husband, but should she guess it, he must forfeit his head. She claimed 3 days in which to think over the riddles, but she was so very clever that she invariably guessed them in a much shorter time. 9 suitors had already lost their lives when the king's son arrived, and, dazzled by her beauty, determined to risk his life in hopes of winning her. So he came before her and propounded his riddle. "What is this?" he asked. "One slew none, and yet killed 12. She could not think what it was. She thought, and looked through all her books of riddles and puzzles, but she found nothing to help her, and could not guess. In fact, she was at her wits' end. As she could think of no way to guess the riddle, she ordered her maid to steal at night into the prince's bedroom and to listen, for she thought that he might perhaps talk aloud in his dreams and so betray the secret. But the clever servant had taken his master's place, and when the maid came, he tore off the cloak she had wrapped herself in and hunted her off with a whip. On the second night, the princess sent her lady-in-waiting, hoping that she might succeed better. But the servant took away her mantle and chased her away. Also, on the third night, the king's son thought he really might feel safe, so he went to bed. But in the middle of the night, the princess came herself, all huddled up in a misty gray mantle, and sat down near him. When she thought he was fast asleep, she spoke to him, hoping he would answer in the midst of his dreams, as many people do. But he was wide awake all the time, and heard and understood everything very well. Then she asked, "One slew none, what is that?" And he answered, "A raven which fed on the carcass of a poisoned horse." She went on, "And yet killed 12, what is that?" "Those are 12 murderers who ate the raven and died of it." As soon as she knew the riddle, she tried to slip away, but he held her mantle so tightly that she was obliged to leave it behind. Next morning, the princess announced that she had guessed the riddle and sent for the 12 judges, before whom she declared it. But the young man begged to be heard, too, and said, "She came by night to question me, otherwise she never could have guessed it." The judges said, "Bring us some proof." So the servant brought out the 3 cloaks, and when the judges saw the gray one, which the princess was in the habit of wearing, they said, "Let it be embroidered with gold and silver. It shall be your wedding mantle." The White Snake. Not very long ago there lived a king, the fame of whose wisdom was spread far and wide. Nothing appeared to be unknown to him, and it really seemed as if tidings of the most secret matters must be borne to him by the winds. He had one very peculiar habit. Every day after the dinner table had been cleared and everyone had retired, a confidential servant brought in a dish. It was covered, and neither the servant nor anyone else had any idea what was on it, for the king never removed the cover or partook of the dish till he was quite alone. This went on for some time, till one day the servant who removed the dish was so overcome with curiosity that he could not resist carrying it off to his own room. After carefully locking the door, he lifted the cover, and there he saw a white snake lying on the dish. On seeing it, he could not restrain his desire to taste it, so he cut off a small piece and put it in his mouth. Hardly had it touched his tongue than he heard a strange sort of whispering of tiny voices outside his window. He stepped to the casement to listen, and found that the sound proceeded from the sparrows, who were talking together and telling each other all they had seen in the fields and woods. The piece of the white snake which he had eaten had enabled him to understand the language of animals. Now, on this particular day, it so happened that the queen lost her favorite ring, and suspicion fell on the confidential servant who had access to all parts of the palace. The king sent for him and threatened him angrily, saying that if he had not found the thief by the next day, he should himself be taken up and tried. It was useless to assert his innocence. He was dismissed without ceremony. In his agitation and distress, he went down to the yard to think over what he could do in this trouble. Here were a number of ducks resting near a little stream and pluming themselves with their bills, whilst they kept up an animated conversation amongst themselves. The servant stood still, listening to them. They were talking of where they had been waddling about all the morning, and of the good food they had found. But one of them remarked rather sadly, "There's something lying very heavy on my stomach, for in my haste I've swallowed a ring, which was lying just under the queen's window." No sooner did the servant hear this than he seized the duck by the neck, carried it off to the kitchen, and said to the cook, "Suppose you kill this duck. You see she's nice and fat." "Yes, indeed," said the cook, weighing the duck in his hand. "She certainly has spared no pains to stuff herself well, and must have been waiting for the spit for some time." So he chopped off her head, and when she was opened, there was the queen's ring in her stomach. It was easy enough now for the servant to prove his innocence, and the king, feeling he had done him an injustice and anxious to make some amends, desired him to ask any favor he chose, and promised to give him the highest post at court he could wish for. The servant, however, declined everything, and only begged for a horse and some money to enable him to travel, as he was anxious to see something of the world. When his request was granted, he set off on his journey, and in the course of it he one day came to a large pond, on the edge of which he noticed 3 fishes which had got entangled in the reeds and were gasping for water. Though fish are generally supposed to be quite mute, he heard them grieving aloud at the prospect of dying in this wretched manner. Having a very kind heart, he dismounted and soon set the prisoners free and in the water once more. They flapped with joy, and stretching up their heads cried to him, "We will remember and reward you for saving us." He rode further, and after a while he thought he heard a voice in the sand under his feet. He paused to listen and heard the king of the ants complaining, "If only men with their awkward beasts would keep clear of us. That stupid horse is crushing my people mercilessly to death with his great hoofs." The servant at once turned into a side path, and the ant king called after him, "We'll remember and reward you." The road next led through a wood, where he saw a father and a mother raven standing by their nest and throwing out their young. "Away with you, you young rascals," they cried. "We can't feed you any longer. You are quite big enough to support yourselves now." The poor little birds lay on the ground flapping and beating their wings, and shrieked, "We poor helpless children, feed ourselves indeed. Why, we can't even fly yet. What can we do but die of hunger?" Then the kind youth dismounted, drew his sword, and killing his horse, left it there as food for the young ravens. They hopped up, satisfied their hunger, and piped, "We'll remember and reward you." He was now obliged to trust to his own legs, and after walking a long way, he reached a big town. Here he found a great crowd and much commotion in the streets, and a herald rode about announcing, "The king's daughter seeks a husband, but whoever would woo her must first execute a difficult task, and if he does not succeed, he must be content to forfeit his life." Many had risked their lives, but in vain. When the youth saw the king's daughter, he was so dazzled by her beauty that he forgot all idea of danger and went to the king to announce himself a suitor. On this, he was led out to a large lake, and a gold ring was thrown into it before his eyes. The king desired him to dive after it, adding, "If you return without it, you will be thrown back into the lake time after time, till you are drowned in its depths." Everyone felt sorry for the handsome young fellow and left him alone on the shore. There he stood thinking and wondering what he could do, when all of a sudden he saw 3 fishes swimming along and recognized them as the very same whose lives he had saved. The middle fish held a mussel in its mouth, which it laid at the young man's feet, and when he picked it up and opened it, there was the golden ring inside. Full of delight, he brought it to the king's daughter, expecting to receive his promised reward. The haughty princess, however, on hearing that he was not her equal by birth, despised him and exacted the fulfillment of a second task. She went into the garden, and with her own hands she strewed 10 sacks full of millet all over the grass. "He must pick all that up tomorrow morning before sunrise," she said. "Not a grain must be lost." The youth sat down in the garden and wondered how it would be possible for him to accomplish such a task. But he could think of no expedient, and sat there sadly expecting to meet his death at daybreak. But when the first rays of the rising sun fell on the garden, he saw the 10 sacks all completely filled, standing there in a row, and not a single grain missing. The Ant King, with his thousands and thousands of followers, had come during the night, and the grateful creatures had industriously gathered all the millet together and put it in the sacks. The king's daughter came down to the garden herself, and saw to her amazement that her suitor had accomplished the task she had given him. But even now she could not bend her proud heart, and she said, "Though he has executed these 2 tasks, yet he shall not be my husband till he brings me an apple from the tree of life." The young man did not even know where the tree of life grew, but he set off, determined to walk as far as his legs would carry him, though he had no hope of ever finding it. After journeying through 3 different kingdoms, he reached a wood one night, and lying down under a tree, prepared to go to sleep there. Suddenly, he heard a sound in the boughs, and a golden apple fell right into his hand. At the same moment, 3 ravens flew down to him, perched on his knee, and said, "We are the 3 young ravens whom you saved from starvation. When we grew up and heard you were searching for the golden apple, we flew far away over the seas to the end of the world, where the tree of life grows, and fetched the golden apple for you." Full of joy, the young man started on his way back and brought the golden apple to the lovely princess, whose objections were now entirely silenced. They divided the apple of life and ate it together, and her heart grew full of love for him. So they lived together to a great age in undisturbed happiness. The story of a clever tailor. Once upon a time, there lived an exceedingly proud princess. If any suitor for her hand ventured to present himself, she would give him some riddle or conundrum to guess, and if he failed to do so, he was hunted out of the town with scorn and derision. She gave out publicly that all comers were welcome to try their skill, and that whoever could solve her riddle should be her husband. Now it happened that 3 tailors had met together, and the 2 elder thought that after having successfully put in so many fine and strong stitches, with never a wrong one amongst them, they were certain to do the right thing here too. The 3rd tailor was a lazy young scamp who did not even know his own trade properly, but who thought that surely luck would stand by him now, just for once, for if not, what was to become of him? The 2 others said to him, "You just stay at home, You'll never get on much with your small allowance of brains." But the little tailor was not to be daunted, and said he had set his mind on it, and meant to shift for himself. So off he started as though the whole world belonged to him. The 3 tailors arrived at court, where they had themselves duly presented to the princess, and begged she would propound her riddles. "For," said they, "here were the right men at last, with wits so sharp and so fine you might almost thread a needle with them." Then said the princess, "I have on my head 2 different kinds of hair. Of what colors are they?" "If that's all," said the first tailor, "they are most likely black and white, like the kind of cloth we call pepper and salt." "Wrong," said the princess. "Then," said the second tailor, "if they are not black and white, no doubt they are red and brown, like my father's Sunday coat." "Wrong again," said the princess. "Now let the third speak. I see he thinks he knows all about it." Then the young tailor stepped boldly to the front and said, "The princess has 1 silver and 1 golden hair on her head, and those are the 2 colors." When the princess heard this, she turned quite pale, and almost fainted away with fear. For the little tailor had hit the mark, and she had firmly believed that not a soul could guess it. When she had recovered herself, she said, "Don't fancy you have won me yet. There is something else you must do first. Below in the stable is a bear with whom you must spend the night. And if when I get up in the morning I find you still alive, you shall marry me." She quite expected to rid herself of the tailor in this way, for the bear had never left anyone alive who had once come within reach of his claws. The tailor, however, had no notion of being scared, but said cheerily, "Bravely dared is half won." When evening came on, he was taken to the stable. The bear tried to get at him at once, and to give him a warm welcome with his great paws. "Gently, gently," said the tailor, "I'll soon teach you to be quiet." And he coolly drew a handful of walnuts from his pocket and began cracking and eating them as though he had not a care or anxiety in the world. When the bear saw this, he began to long for some nuts himself. The tailor dived into his pocket and gave him a handful, but they were pebbles, not nuts. The bear thrust them into his mouth, but try as he might, he could not manage to crack them. "Dear me," thought he, "what a stupid fool I must be, can't even crack a nut." And he said to the tailor, "I say, crack my nuts for me, will you?" "You're a nice sort of fellow," said the tailor. "The idea of having those great jaws and not being able even to crack a walnut." So he took the stone, quickly changed it for a nut, and crack. It split open in a moment. "Let me try again," said the bear. "When I see the thing done, it looks so easy, I fancy I must be able to manage it myself." So the tailor gave him some more pebbles, and the bear bit and gnawed away as hard as he could. But I need hardly say that he did not succeed in cracking one of them. Presently the tailor took out a little fiddle and began playing on it. When the bear heard the music, he could not help dancing, and after he had danced some time, he was so pleased that he said to the tailor, "I say, is fiddling difficult?" "Mere child's play," replied the tailor. "Look here, you press the strings with the fingers of the left hand, and with the right you draw the bow across them. So, then it goes as easily as possible, up and down, tra-la-la-la-la." "Oh," cried the bear, "I do wish I could play like that. Then I could dance whenever the fancy took me. What do you think? Would you give me some lessons?" "With all my heart," said the tailor, "if you are sharp about it. But just let me look at your paws. Dear me, your nails are terribly long. I must really cut them first." Then he fetched a pair of stalks, and the bear laid his paws on them, and the tailor screwed them up tight. "Now just wait whilst I fetch my scissors," said he, and left the bear growling away to his heart's content, whilst he lay down in a corner and fell fast asleep. When the princess heard the bear growling so loud that night, she made sure he was roaring with delight as he worried the tailor. Next morning she rose, feeling quite cheerful and free from care. But when she looked across towards the stables, there stood the tailor in front of the door, looking as fresh and lively as a fish in the water. After this, it was impossible to break the promise she had made so publicly. So the king ordered out the state coach to take her and the tailor to church to be married. As they were starting, the two bad-hearted other tailors, who were envious of the younger one's happiness, went to the stable and unscrewed the bear. Off he tore after the carriage, foaming with rage. The princess heard his puffing and roaring, and growing frightened, she cried, "Oh dear, the bear is after us and will certainly catch us up." The tailor remained quite unmoved. He quietly stood on his head, stuck his legs out at the carriage window, and called out to the bear, "Do you see my stocks? If you don't go home this minute, I'll screw you tight into them." When the bear saw and heard this, he turned right round and ran off as fast as his legs would carry him. The tailor drove on unmolested to church, where he and the princess were married, and he lived with her many years as happy and merry as a lark. Whoever does not believe this story must pay $1.